say you're all here a little bit early, so I say we just go ahead and start. So I don't have the notes written up for this, but I do have, if I go and I show you real quick, I do actually have a video recording based off this notes already, and I've already posted online on improving visual design. So we'll talk about that. You can go back and kind of look at that if you want to. I'm going to launch a new Word document. I'm going to show you actually in Word, and whether you use Word or whether you use HTML or PowerPoint or anything, wherever you have to be presenting this type of information or information in general, this is going to be relevant. So I'm going to look at 4 things that you can do to help your visual design of whatever you're designing so that you can help get your message across better. So this is not specific to web pages. This is not specific to any type of application at all. These are just very generic, very simple design principles. If you were to go and pick up a design book, you could find anywhere between 7 and 12 design principles that people use, and they'll talk about shapes and lines and weights and all these different things, iconography, and if you go and pick up like the next book beside it, it'll have another between 7 and 12, and they may have different design principles. You might go, well, okay, like 3 of them were over here that were in both, but then and these 2 were called different things, but then these were all like different. How many are there? And the fact of the matter is there are dozens and dozens. So trying to figure out which ones you're going to use and which ones you're not going to use and how you're going to use one type of stuff is where it becomes a little bit of a challenge. So I'm going to show you 4 that I found that are very simple, very easy to remember, easy to learn, easy to put in place. You don't have to be a fancy designer to figure it out. You don't have to use fancy design tools to figure it out. It's just a matter of how are you going to go about the process. So the first one I want to talk about is what we refer to as contrast. So contrast is the idea of 2 things which are different. So you might have heard of the term compare and contrast, where you're going to have 2 things and you see what's similar about them, and 2 things and you see what's different about them. Contrast from a design perspective or a visual perspective is going to be focusing on how are 2 things different. And a perfect example of this is I'm going to insert a title. And then some page content. Notice that my title, this could be like a header. It could be a page title, it could be a header, it could be whatever. Notice that it is much bigger, and so it stands out, it draws your attention in. Then the page content section is much smaller. And so I can see that there is a strong difference between these 2. In size of my font or size of my element is one of the simple ways that I can go in and determine, is there a contrasting piece of information? A lot of times I'm going to use it to draw attention to an element. The bigger the element, the more I want to draw attention to. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with that little sentence of page content. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just, it's not as important to look at and see. So first thing I'm going to look at is size. And that's going to make sure that things like my headers are standing out. I know that they're important because they're bigger and stuff like that. Okay. The other thing I can have is what we have called page, or is called font weight. And so I have Okay, so I might have a regular text like this, but I want to emphasize the word important. Okay, important might be a key term. Maybe I have a person's name. I want to make sure that person's name is shown. I can simply come in and bold this. And now you see how your eye just kind of naturally goes where it's bold? That's a normal thing. So if I went in and tried to change this word and make it like, increase its size like that, it would look kind of weird because it's in the middle of a sentence. And so that doesn't look normal. But if I have it so where it's the same size as all my other stuff, but I just bold it, it's still something that it draws your eye to it. You're still seeing that, hey, this is contrasting, this must be important. Let me see, do I know this person? Do I know this place? Do I know this term? Um, you'll see when I like write notes and stuff like that for people, for my classes, I'll put like keywords and definitions and stuff like that. I'll bold them. That way you can kind of see it. It draws your attention. And you go, oh, this is important. This is something I need to do, something you know about. Okay. So I can make something bigger. I can make something heavier or bolded. Um, Inside of CSS, I can also change its color. So if I'm looking at this, all this is black, but I might take that important word and say, yeah, but I want you to be red. And red's going to stand out because red is very different from black. It's brighter. My eye is drawn to red. There are certain colors your eyes are drawn to, and that's why that they're used in emergency vehicles of different types, whether it be fire trucks or a rescue or any of those types of things. Reds and yellows and stuff are done because they stand out. They draw your attention. Now, I may not want to use red because that has certain color connotations to it, but I could at the same time say, what about using a nice green or a blue? And all these also help stand out. Now, you notice this is kind of a dark blue and it starts to lose effectiveness because while it stands out, it doesn't have a lot of contrast. And I've got to be careful with this. This is something I have to be really careful of. If I come down here and go even darker blue, you may not notice there's a difference at all. And there's a term for that. It's called conflicting. So contrast is when there's a difference, and the bigger the difference, the better, up to a point. What point that is depends upon what you're doing. Okay. If you're looking for like an absolute size, it really depends upon what you're talking about. If I have like a business card, like here's a business card right here. I don't know if you can see or not. The company name, the person's name, that's kind of a little bit bigger and stuff. But I can only go so big before I can't see what's on the business card anymore. On the other hand, the size difference that they made the person's name on this business card would not be noticeable if it was on like a bulletin on a bulletin board, maybe, or on a billboard. If I'm thinking like a billboard out on the side of the street, and I had text that was a quarter of an inch tall instead of an eighth of an inch tall, I wouldn't see any of that. So a lot of this is going to be relative. There's a blue one that important you're probably not seeing at all, and that's because it's referred to as conflicting. So when you have too little contrast, you have something that conflicts. And conflicts might be I noticed that, but it looks like it's wrong. So contrast should stand out, should be obvious to go, aha, I know I'm supposed to look at this. This is important for me to see. Conflicting makes me wonder, did you screw up? Because this does not look right. Okay, so that's conflicting. This blue is a perfect example of that. Let me give you another couple examples real quick so you can see. You'll notice here I've got a whole section of gray, and I might show you like this medium gray, and I might go, did I really change anything? It almost looks identical. I might miss it. On the other hand, I might have like this really light gray. And notice how the background color being white with that really light gray, do you see the importance? You might not even see it because it's such a light gray on such a light color background. As now I would have to go in and say, you know what, I'm going to put a black background with white text so you can stand out. Now I can see it. Okay. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I'm not a big fan of it. Technically, I can see it. Technically, it's going to stand out because it's different than anything else that's on the page. I can do this in CSS. I can set background color or foreground color. That's fine. Does it work from a design perspective? It works from getting your attention. Does it look good? Maybe not. So these are things I got to think about. If I'm going to use color, I want to make sure that I am different enough from my other items, text or images or whatever, that I stand out. At the same time, I've got to make sure that I don't blend into my background. Okay, I don't want to conflict with either my background or my other text in this case. So those are all real important things that I have to consider whenever I am applying a color change or a uh, uh, image change with different images that might be slightly different. I want to make sure that I have things that are the same. So this is a perfect example of this, okay? And this is contrast. Now, I'm going to give you another C1, or I'm going to give you another one that's going to be very similar. You might go, wait a second. This is like the exact opposite of contrast. And you can think of this as either repetition, or you might think of it as conformity. And repetition and conformity are kind of similar things, and they are going to be how we're going to use the same design elements again and again. So here's another paragraph. Oops. Oops. Have you ever noticed that when you're typing in something like Word, all of my paragraphs start at the same place? Ever notice that? You might say, well, that's interesting. I never noticed that. You probably haven't. It just happens automatically. It happens in a lot of things. If I'm in Excel and I'm typing a bunch of stuff in, they all start left justified. In my HTML page, they're all left justified. You might say, well, why is that? If you're asking that question, or maybe you've asked that question before and said, well, why is that? That's a really good question to think about. And it doesn't actually always happen. If in English or in a lot of languages, especially of European descent, your Germanic languages, your Romance languages, your French and Italian and Spanish, stuff like that, they all start left justified. That's because we all read left to right. And so by keeping a consistent location for us to know where to start looking, it makes it easier for us to read. Now, if I come in here and I say, well, yeah, but I want to center justify this. This is fine. And pressing the center button is easy, and I can do it inside of CSS and say text align center. And it works like this. The problem is now my eye has to go and find where the start of each new line is. And because each line starts at a different spot, it's much, much harder for me to be able to read this text. Okay, so this is a lot. This is repetition. It's all center aligned, but it's not good alignment. I'm going to prefer to have something that is all center or all left aligned. I'm going to use that repetition for everything, for my headers, for my paragraphs. I might even use it for my images. Now, I might move my images off to the right-hand side and have all my images to the right-hand side. That's another form of repetition. You might say, well, contrast is all about being different. Repetition or conformity is all about being the same. How can those be two different design principles that are right side by side? And that's a wonderful question to ask. And the answer is, without repetition, I don't know when I have contrast. So those two actually have to work hand in hand together. Let me give you another example, just so you can kind of see what this looks like. And I'm going to draw a series of boxes here. So I've got a box. I've got a box. And you know what? I'm just going to copy and paste these boxes. Now, what do you notice about these boxes real quick? Feel free to unmute your mic. I can't hear you if your mics are muted. Do you notice anything interesting or weird kind of about these boxes?
The difference of size?
Okay, so they're pretty close to the same size, but they could be slightly different. Like this one here looks a little bit shorter than this one. This one looks like it might be a little bit longer than my second box. Okay, does that feel natural to you, or does it feel like something's kind of weird?
The size between them, maybe.
Okay, the size between them, the space in between them, they're all different, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I tried to keep them all lined up vertically the same, but then this guy's hanging way off to the side, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if I were to see that inside of a web page or inside of like a catalog, and these were like 6 or 7 different items I could go purchase, this would this make you feel comfortable, or would this make you feel kind of a little bit off when you're looking at going like, I'm not sure I want to purchase from this company. They can't even line up a series of boxes.
Yeah, a little off.
Yeah. Okay. It's a little bit off. And think about if you've got like a wall of pictures and like one's crooked, doesn't it really bother you? You want to go in and fix it? Or is that just me? Maybe it's just me. Okay. So I'm going to come over here just real quick. And I am going to align these top, and then I'm going to distribute them horizontally. And now all my boxes have the same spacing between them. They're all aligned against the same top margin. They all have the same spacing. Does that feel a little bit more comfortable? Probably. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's our human nature. Our human nature is to find something that stands out that's a little bit different and go, why are you different, and is this a problem? Okay, this goes way, way, way back to human psychology, and you can go back 50,000 years when we were first starting to form into small tribes and small cities and towns and stuff like that. Depending upon what sociological text you read, this could be 50,000 years ago. It could be as recent as 10,000 years ago. But if I've got a little tribe of people, or I got a little city, or however I want to think of myself, and there's one person that's different psychologically, we look at that and go, are they supposed to be in my tribe? Are they a friend? Or are they an enemy? They look different to me. You know, we all have brown hair, they have blonde hair. That's not normal. Now, the downside of this is if you act paranoid about this can be really bad, especially for that person that's got blonde hair when no one else has blonde hair. On the other hand, in our world, with something like this, we just might not trust the source as much. We might not like it as much, it might make us feel uncomfortable. If we come across that wall of pictures and that one picture's crooked, we might come up and straighten it, that type of thing, so that everything looks perfectly aligned. So repetition is going to provide a calming sense because it's something that people can expect. And I'm going to expect this across my pages. So if I have like a template that I can use for all my pages, that's great, because now all my pages are going to look the same. That's the reason I'm going to use an external style sheet, so that I can apply the same styles to every page. And so all my headers follow the same rules, all my paragraphs follow the same rules, etc. So repetition is really good. And then if I need to be off on something, I can really be off on it. And then people don't go like, oh, is this a problem, or is this, something I need to pay attention to? Well, maybe something I need to pay attention to, because now I'm using contrast. This one is way different location than all these others. There's something special about this one I need to pay attention to. It's a contrast, not a conflict. When I get stuff that's just a little bit off, it's really bad. So I want to keep things as consistent as possible across pages, across a single page, whatever. And if I'm not going to have it repeating, then I'm going to have it contrasting. I want to make sure I really contrast it, not conflict. Okay? So that's your repetition, sometimes known as conformity, that you can use. There's another one that's very similar to this, and it's called alignment. And so here, once again, alignment can be something as simple as making sure that all my boxes have the same top and bottom lines. If I had, stuff that was kind of like this, that just feels a little weird, okay? It's going to make you feel a little uncomfortable. This is a deep-rooted psychological thing, because they're all just a little bit off. There's no repetition, no structure to it. Alignment, just like contrast and repetition kind of work together. If I have repetition, I also have alignment, because a lot of times I want to align things the same way. Alignment can be things like my margins for my paragraphs. It can be things like a series of images. You might say, well, doesn't HTML do a lot of this alignment for me? Well, yeah, it does. However, the sizing of elements. So if I have, for example, let me just delete 3 of these boxes so I can be a little bit more obvious with this. Okay, so I've got 3 boxes here, and I can come in here and say, oh, well, I'm going to align these because that's what I'm supposed to do. So I'm going to say align the tops, and I'm going to distribute them horizontally correctly. And I've got my 3 images on my web page. Well, if I look at that, or maybe it's little graphs, or maybe it's, whatever, every one of those is aligned on the top, but the bottoms aren't aligned. And so I'm going, I wonder why. So if I can go in and resize these images, and we talked about things like GIMP yesterday or last week, or paint.net, both of those are free. GIMP is available on Macintosh as well as PC. Paint.net's only available on PC. Now I can go in and resize these images and say, oh, you know what? This is a problem. I'm going to crop this and get this to look a little bit more consistent. And now, okay, now my top and my bottom's aligned. My text and my image here is aligned. Those are all things I'm going to work on alignment. I'm going to see how things are being put together and work on them. If I have something turned to a side, I'm going to have everything turned to the same side. So I'm working on alignment, and my alignment and my repetition are going to go, like I said, hand in hand. The alignment of items will provide a calming sensation to a person. People often don't believe it. They go, how is that possible? It is. And, we could take for example, these little paragraphs, and with CSS, we could apply, class A, class B, all the way to class E, and give them different margins on the left-hand side, so they just moved a little bit, and it would make it much harder to read, much harder to even look at. Your mind wants those things aligned. So making little changes can have a big effect. The question is it supposed to? Now, on the flip side, let's say I was building a website for a haunted mansion. Well, I might want to have things all out of alignment because it gives that sense of kind of anxiety and fear and whatnot. It helps build that. It's a deep-rooted psychological issue that we have to deal with. But it's easier to make things aligned nowadays, especially in something like HTML. If you're in something like PowerPoint, it's a little bit harder because your text and your images are free floating, and so you have to sometimes work a little bit harder to align things. Anytime I have something like that, I use what's known as a guide. And a guide can be either a physical device or it can be a part of your software where you can like draw a line and see, okay, am I lining up with this item? And then you can remove that line easily. Back in the old days, before we had software guides, I would take a sheet of paper, kind of like this, just generic sheet of paper, and I would hold it up to the monitor and see, okay, is this aligned the way I want it to? And then I would turn it this way, okay, is this aligned the way I want it to? Or if I had a poster board that I had to use, I could take a sheet of paper and go, okay, yep, all my information is nice and on the same line. If it was bigger than a sheet of paper could measure, and kind of make sure it's aligned right, then I could do something like use a yardstick or a meter stick or something that's a little bit bigger. I'm just looking for something that's nice and straight. And I want to check to make sure, like I said, tops are aligned, bottoms are aligned, and my margins are aligned. Some people prefer to use, there's a text alignment called Justify. And Justify has a left alignment on your edge and a right alignment. And it puts little extra spaces in between words so that it's all perfectly aligned, left and right. And only the last line is not able to cover the full width of your screen. So it just kind of depends upon what tools you have available to you and how you can adjust things. One of the biggest problems I've seen in working with alignment with images on a web page is if the image has like a white background, and it might have like a little bit of a border around it or something like that, so it doesn't look like it lines up with the surrounding text or other images and stuff like that. So that's the biggest problem we'll generally run into in web design for alignment. And that's just what they call an optical perspective, because it's something you visualize and you can see, or not see because everything matches up. So that's the only thing you got to be really careful of as far as that goes. Otherwise, alignment's pretty easy inside of HTML. Okay, so we had contrast. We had repetition or conformity. We had alignment, and then our last one is going to be proximity. We've actually talked about proximity in the past. We talked about it with if I have a header in here, and let's just go ahead and as an example, make this a header. You'll notice that when I made this a header, the text between this line and this line, that space between them actually shrank. And I got more space between other information you know, and let's not forget about this one. That spacing was designed to say, hey, the stuff up above, it's fine, but it's not related to me. I'm starting a new major thought, okay? I want to make sure that my sentences have that spacing, a certain amount of spacing between them, and my lines, my paragraph, and then I'm going to separate my paragraphs with extra spacing. And I can do that all with my margins. In fact, that's mostly what I'm going to do is use my margins for a spacing. So a little bit of spacing means that the information goes together and ties directly to it. Additional spacing means that it's not tied to it. It's not as relevant. I mean, it doesn't mean it's not relevant. It's just not relevant between these two items. Are not related. The best example to see this, and it's not right now because of what we're going through worldwide, obviously, but if you were to go like to a store um, and you see groups of people together, you can see and estimate the closest that they have to one another based upon the physical distance that they are between one another. The closer people stand together, the more they trust them, the more relationship there is between them, and that relationship could be strictly platonic friends. It could be romantic relationship between um, two spouses, or between a familial type of relationship, child and parent type of thing. Um, and if you don't know someone, you tend to stay a little bit further away. If you don't like someone, you stay, or you think that they might be a threat, you tend to stay even further away. If you're walking in a big city, in a small city like Greenville, in the campus stuff, you didn't have this nearly as much. But if you had um, a smaller city, or a bigger city, you were in Knoxville, or you were in New York City or something like that, and you're kind of walk around doing your thing, and there's someone on the other side of the street as you, and you're on this side, and they cross the street, and they're going to be meeting up kind of close to where you are. Um, that closing of space, when it's someone that you don't know, as a stranger, that will put you on edge. You will become concerned for your own safety. Once again, this goes back to primal instincts that we have, that we've used to survive over the years. Like, who are you? Why are you coming so close to me? Um, if I'm at the ATM, I'm getting cash out. I want people to be standing 6 to 8 feet back from me. Why? I don't want to get mugged. It's that simple. We do the same thing inside of our web page. We want space to separate out what is not as related to one another, and less space to separate out what is. Now, even with that, I don't want to have things like intermingled. If I have this really long paragraph, and all my text is just like right there, it makes it really, really hard to read. I always need some amount of spacing, but how much? So your spacing, or sometimes referred to as positioning, is also very relevant as to how things are going to get placed and how things are going to work together. Your spacing can also work with your repetition, because I want all my paragraphs across my whole website to have about the same spacing. I don't want some paragraphs to be really tight and others to be really loose. That doesn't work. I need to have an appropriate amount of spacing there. At the same time, I don't want them changing, and it looks like every page was designed by someone else. So I'm going to have that repetition involved with my spacing. I'm going to have a contrast in spacing, where I bring either a lot of spacing or very little spacing to show that relationship, and it needs to be contrasting, not conflicting. So my spacing will also deal with the contrast to help further kind of illustrate or make it stand out as to what's going on. And so that's another aspect of your positioning that becomes really important that we have to look at. Another perfect example of that is when we were doing lists the other day. If we had a series of list items, and those items by default had like no margin, and so they were super, super close, and the text was right on top of each other. And so we went in and said, okay, every list item gets a little bit of spacing. I got some room to breathe. It's a little bit easier. Um, and so those are all things that I have to look at, I have to consider when I'm building out my web page. Is my defaults may not be the best thing for me from a visual perspective, in order to uh, find something, make something that's easy to look at, easy to read, and stuff like that. So keep those 4 things in mind. Those are the 4 simple things: contrast, repetition, alignment, and your proximity or positioning. Those 4 things will do a really good job of helping you have a be able to communicate what it is you're trying to communicate. Like I said, and it's not tied to just a web page. It can be tied to any type of visual form whatsoever that you use, because you're going to have to communicate throughout your entire career, whether you're doing presentations for your boss or presentations to other people, co-workers or people below you, training seminars where you're training people or talking about stuff at trade shows or other things. Those are all examples of things that I've had to do, and trust me, some of the most numerous times I've been in is like, okay, we got to talk to our boss, and how do we do that? I bring out stuff like this. Some of this is going to seem very straightforward. You probably went, well, yeah, of course I knew that, and that's great. But I always recommend keeping that in mind when you actually build something out. Because when you actually build it out, when you actually work on it, that's when it becomes really important. So because it's easy to kind of forget about it, like, oh yeah, I know about that, but I know about that in the back of my mind. I don't think about it. So if I can work on putting those things in the front of my mind when I'm designing something, it's a whole lot better. I have a family member who asked me to review. He serves on a board for a nonprofit, and he asked me to review their website. They're getting ready to redo their website. And he's like, well, what types of things would you suggest that we look at and talk about? And so I've been making kind of some notations that I go through every couple of days and look and go, oh, well, we're going to need to do this. You might want to do this. You might want to do this. And then we can, build that out from there. But these are things I'll be looking at, all these concepts, because these are also very easy to explain to other people as to why you want to do this, and why you might want to make some of these changes. Now, there's other things I might be looking at, other design principles I might have in the back of my mind that I'm looking at, I'm referencing and stuff like that. But these are the ones I'll be talking about, and I'll explain those other more complicated ones in a measure like this. Give you a perfect example is I've got a series of text here, and I've got a series of boxes. And maybe my text goes with my boxes, maybe it doesn't, but I want to create a visual separation between the two. Well, visual separation, I could use a shape to do that. I could talk about, the design elements of a shape and having something just as simple as coming in here and inserting a line to create a visual separation between my elements. I could talk like that, or I could say, we need to create some positional separation. And we need to contrast a difference between the two, and we can contrast it by putting a line so we know there's a hard break between the two. So that becomes a lot easier to describe to someone who's a non-designer. Has the exact same effect. Nothing changed, because I said I'm contrasting it by putting a separation line, and I'm adding a little bit of space to make it stand out. Nothing else has changed. Or I could have said, we're using a shape to delineate the separation of two separate areas. Exact same thing. Exact same thing I did. There's a line there. Just two different ways of describing it. That's why I like those 4 simple ways. Wish I could say I came up with them. I didn't. I've taken them, I've tweaked them, especially for web design stuff, but there we have a process like that. Any questions on those 4 concepts? Contrasting, repetition, alignment, or proximity, or positioning?
Nope. No, I'm good.
All right. So that's the 4 main things I want to talk about today. And we can end that with today. Next class, I'm going to talk about using images in design. So we talked last week about using the images, and this reason why I've waited to do this one until now is now we have enough understanding of CSS to be able to put all those different concepts in place. And then we did images last week, and so I wanted to talk about, instead of just, okay, and here's how you put an image into a web page, how we're going to pick the right type of images to put into a web page, and how we're going to affect how images affect the web page, and how we want to use images effectively in our web page to describe what we're needing to describe. So that's what we're going to do on Thursday. And if you don't have anything else, then you can work on that. I believe there's going to be a homework assignment that's going to be added. I think I'm going to add it later today if I get the time to finish writing it up. So that will be there. So just kind of keep an eye out for that. But otherwise, we are done for today.
When is the homework assignment due?
It won't be due until next week.
All right.
So you'll have plenty of time to do it. So don't worry about that. I hope to get it done this last week, and I got my weeks all screwed up, and I forgot that this weekend was Easter weekend, and so I had a lot of stuff that I wasn't planning on having to do that I had to do for that. So I'm going to try and get that finished and posted today for you guys.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all. I appreciate you coming. I will see you all on Thursday.
Bye.